You have probably heard that modern highways are safer than ever. And for cars, that is mostly true. But motorcycles live in the gaps between those promises. The guardrails and concrete edges lining our roads are designed around one kind of crash, not the kind where a rider slides, tumbles, and meets hardware at ground level. Stay with me to the end, because when you see how these standards are written, you'll understand why this keeps happening and who keeps signing off on it. When the brand and the reality drift apart. When a brand has been around long enough, its image becomes automatic. The logo alone still carries authority before anything is said. It sits on signs, jackets, and tank badges, quietly reminding people of what it once promised. Confidence still radiates from official statements, polished photos, and carefully chosen words. On the surface, nothing appears rushed or unstable, yet small moments begin to interrupt that comfort. Conversations drift without intention. Expectations feel slightly delayed, like a response arriving half a beat late. The confidence sounds practiced rather than earned, repeating itself instead of reacting. Nothing obvious is missing, but nothing feels fully present either. The mismatch never announces itself. People notice it in ordinary settings. A pause where excitement used to live. A glance that lingers longer than it once did. The brand still speaks in bold tones, but the echo does not carry as far. These are not complaints or accusations. They are quiet observations that surface when familiarity meets hesitation. Observation accumulates quietly through routine moments, forming patterns without commentary. Familiar signals repeat often enough to register, yet never loudly. Attention sharpens not from alarm, but from consistency, where ordinary details align into something measurable and difficult to dismiss entirely. That sense of misalignment does not demand answers. It simply introduces doubt, the kind that settles in without raising its voice. The image holds and the story continues, yet the connection feels thinner than before. It lingers quietly, unnoticed at first, reshaping expectations without announcements, warnings, or explanations that anyone asks for later on. Physical evidence on the ground. Once that feeling appears, it quietly spreads, opening the door to what becomes visible next. Evidence does not arrive loudly. It shows up in physical changes that are easy to overlook until they stack up. Buildings that once felt permanent quietly go dark. Signs disappear. Windows stay covered longer than expected. Nothing dramatic happens in a single day, but the environment begins to thin. Floor space starts to change. Areas that once felt full now feel wider. Rows shorten. Gaps appear where machines used to sit shoulder to shoulder. The layout still works, but it note. Longer feels tight or urgent. Movement slows in ways that are subtle enough to ignore, yet consistent enough to notice. Inventory behaves differently too. Machines remain in the same positions across multiple visits. Protective films stay on longer. Tires lose that fresh look before they ever touch pavement. Dust settles where turnover once kept surfaces clean. These details are not interpreted or explained. They simply exist. Tangible change gains credibility when repeated across locations and days. Physical environments record shifts without interpretation, allowing space, light, and movement to speak plainly. Accumulated details establish presence, grounding perception in what remains visible, countable, and consistently unchanged between visits. Nothing here points to a single cause. There is no announcement, no headline, no commentary attached. The physical reality speaks on its own terms. Fewer lights, more space, less rotation. The surroundings tell a story without asking anyone to narrate it. If this breakdown is already changing how you see the road, support the channel by liking this video and subscribing for deeper investigations. Your thoughts matters here, so share your experience and insights below. Uncertainty reaches the top. Taken together, these quiet signals create weight. Not urgency, not alarm, just presence. The kind of presence that suggests change has already started moving. Signals from above tend to arrive more cautiously. They do not appear as announcements or declarations. Instead, they surface through movement that feels restrained. Positions change. Seats open and close. Language tightens. What was once steady becomes measured. Public disagreement begins to appear in small, controlled doses. Statements are corrected. Timelines shift. Clarifications follow earlier remarks. None of it escalates on its own, but the consistency matters. It suggests that alignment is no longer automatic, even at the highest levels. Internal. Tension shows up through silence, as much as speech. Topics avoid depth. Questions receive partial answers. Attention drifts toward risk management rather than confidence building. These are not signs of collapse. They are signs of caution, replacing certainty. Stability at higher levels influences interpretation below, even without explanation. When signals adjust upward, observers recalibrate expectations quietly. The effect spreads through tone, timing, and restraint, creating awareness that decisions depend on conditions no longer assumed fixed or permanent everywhere. What matters here is not the cause, but the reach. When uncertainty extends upward, it confirms that change is not isolated. If you want the gear and accessories that actually reduce risk on rides like this, check the description. I linked the exact pics there. Habit turns into hesitation. It moves through layers that rarely acknowledge discomfort publicly. The tone becomes careful, the posture becomes defensive, without admitting fear. Caution at that level changes how everyone else listens, waits, and interprets even the smallest signals moving through the system. This shift does not explain what comes next. It only establishes that the ground beneath decisions is less stable than before. And once stability at the top feels conditional, observers begin to look outward, measuring how far that uncertainty might travel. Behavior rarely changes all at once. It adjusts in small, practical ways that feel reasonable in isolation. Patterns that once ran on habit begin to slow. Decisions that used to feel automatic now require an extra conversation or an extra night of consideration. Momentum fades without drama. Impulse upgrades become less common. Timelines stretch. What once moved from interest to action within days now waits for confirmation. Conversations circle back instead of moving forward, not because of dissatisfaction, but because certainty feels less available. Purchase discussions pause. More often, questions multiply. Details matter longer than they used to. The process itself changes shape, shifting from excitement toward evaluation. Nothing stops outright, yet nothing accelerates either. This shift does not announce itself as resistance. It appears as restraint, a willingness to wait, a preference to observe. Trust is not withdrawn, but it is no longer assumed. It must be earned again through consistency rather than reputation. When habits change, they leave markers. Time stretches, commitments delay, energy redirects. These signals do not accuse or explain. They simply mark the moment where movement slows and caution replaces urgency. The sales line turns downward. Numbers remove uncertainty. Across reporting periods, unit movement no longer holds steady. Shipments register lower totals than earlier cycles, and those reductions repeat instead of correcting. Monthly tallies soften first, then quarterly summaries confirm the direction. The change appears across multiple product groups rather than a single outlier. Distribution data shows contraction. Fewer units leave facilities within comparable windows. Logistics schedules adjust to reduced volume. Storage duration lengthens between departure and delivery. These shifts are recorded without commentary and reflected consistently in outbound records. Regional performance mirrors the same pattern. Areas once considered stable report slower throughput. Strong markets lose momentum before weaker ones recover. geographic spread replaces isolated decline, turning scattered softness into a connected trend. Year over year, comparisons reinforce the measurement. Later periods underperform earlier benchmarks using identical accounting methods. The slope is gradual, not abrupt, but it remains directional. Temporary rebounds fail to erase cumulative movement. None of these figures rely on interpretation. They appear in shipment counts, allocation reports, and audited summaries. The numbers stand independent of explanation or response. Once plotted, the line no longer moves sideways. Measured decline becomes undeniable when recorded consistently across timeframes and regions. Documentation replaces impression, fixing movement into verified sequence. Once confirmed, attention shifts naturally toward formal acknowledgement, as recorded outcomes demand response, independent of narrative or interpretation or emotional framing. With the data fixed in place, attention shifts away from whether movement slowed, and toward how the organization formally acknowledged what the numbers already showed. That acknowledgement set the stage for formal statements that followed in the subsequent reporting cycle period. Financial signals grow cautious. Formal communication begins to change. Forecast ranges narrow, then disappear entirely from guidance releases. Forward-looking statements shift toward conditional language. Projections are withdrawn rather than revised, leaving prior targets unextended. External factors enter official phrasing. Trade conditions are cited. Cost pressures are referenced. Regulatory and macroeconomic uncertainty appears as a standard qualifier. Each mention is brief and standardized, appearing across multiple disclosures. Tone becomes protective. Wording emphasizes flexibility over commitment. Timelines extend without replacement. Plans are framed as adaptable instead of fixed. This adjustment occurs simultaneously across departments, suggesting coordination rather than isolated revision. Financial filings reflect the same posture. Risk sections expand, cautionary statements lengthen. Emphasis moves toward resilience and liquidity rather than expansion. These shifts are visible without interpretation. No commentary accompanies the changes. No narrative attempts to frame them positively or negatively. The documents present restraint as a procedural update, not a reaction. Language tightens and expectations are buffered. Official restraint often precedes structural change, signaling awareness without admission. Language narrows, flexibility replaces projection, and caution becomes procedural. These indicators confirm recognition of limits, establishing context where subsequent operational choices align with acknowledged constraint rather than optimism or expansion. Once projections are removed and pressure is acknowledged, the record stands as confirmation that leadership recognizes constraint. From there, attention naturally moves toward how those constraints interact with the products themselves. That interaction is documented next through measurable characteristics, shifting the focus from statements to specifications. Such framing avoids commentary while maintaining continuity between financial acknowledgement and operational reality. The record remains factual as the examination progresses without interpretive emphasis applied. The product no longer fits the use case. Assessment moves to physical attributes. Specifications define how machines behave over distance and time. Weight accumulates across components, influencing fatigue during extended use. Mass that once felt manageable becomes limiting across longer stretches. Complexity adds another layer. Systems multiply, interfaces expand, adjustments require additional steps. Comfort features exist, but demand attention. Simplicity gives way to configuration, increasing cognitive load during operation. Distance highlights these trade-offs. Extended travel amplifies vibration, heat, and posture sensitivity. Small inefficiencies compound across hours. What performs acceptably in short intervals strains endurance when repeated. Cost aligns with this structure. Higher investment extends expectations for durability and ease. Longevity becomes a factor alongside performance. When expense rises faster than comfort returns, the equation changes without judgment. These characteristics are measurable. weight figures, component counts, and service. Intervals are documented. They describe alignment between design and use rather than success or failure. Suitability emerges through alignment between design attributes and real usage demands. Quantifiable factors reveal stress points over duration and repetition. Evaluating fit clarifies function, allowing assessment to proceed without preference, focusing solely on how structure supports intended operation consistently, reliably. The fit between structure and purpose determines suitability. As measurements replace impressions, evaluation shifts from preference toward practicality. That shift reframes how subsequent choices are made. With suitability defined by measurable alignment, attention moves toward how selection behavior responds to these attributes. Comparison becomes procedural, placing alternatives alongside one another without emotional weighting. This process unfolds quietly as options are reviewed and ranked. Documentation supports each evaluation step. Records remain, consistent throughout, without subjective interpretation being applied. Default status quietly disappears. Selection patterns evolve once evaluation becomes routine. The badge alone no longer completes the decision. Options enter the process early rather than late. Consideration broadens before commitment forms. Comparisons become standard. Features, costs, and delivery timelines sit side by side. The process resembles assessment rather than allegiance. Familiarity no longer shortens the path to agreement. Shortcuts dissolve. Previous assumptions lose efficiency. Decisions require confirmation through details that once went unquestioned. The symbol remains visible, but its influence weakens. Availability elsewhere reinforces the change. Choice expands. Waiting lists shift. Alternative solutions meet similar needs without relying on history. The presence of options alters behavior without announcement. This transition carries no declaration. It unfolds through routine practice. Automatic loyalty fades as evaluation replaces habit. The shift is procedural, not emotional. Decision frameworks adjust once comparison becomes routine rather than exceptional. Familiarity loses efficiency, replaced by evaluation across options. This procedural change redistributes influence quietly, confirming that default selection no longer governs outcomes where choice is exercised deliberately, consistently, methodically, broadly. With default status gone, selection becomes deliberate. The market responds through comparison rather than attachment, completing the measurable progression established earlier. Documentation confirms the change through purchasing patterns recorded over successive periods. Once choice expands, influence redistributes across competing offerings without ceremony. The decision environment stabilizes into comparison as the final variable. Selection becomes a calculation rather than an inheritance. This adjustment completes the measurable shift from assumption to evaluation. No further confirmation is required. Patterns hold consistently across recorded data. Comparative review becomes standard practice. That status change persists, without reversal, over extended periods, documented repeatedly thereafter. Retail adjusts to survive. The change shows first in how orders are placed. Quantities narrow, variety tightens. What once arrived in broad mixes now comes in deliberate selections. Sellers reduce exposure by choosing predictability over optimism. Fewer speculative orders appear on manifests. The emphasis moves toward what turns steadily, rather than what once moved quickly. Service steps forward as the stabilizing force. Work bays remain active, even when floors feel quieter. Maintenance schedules stretch across weeks. Parts counters become the most consistent point of contact. Routine service replaces impulse transactions as the foundation of daily operations. The rhythm shifts from selling to sustaining. Margins compress without drama. Costs rise incrementally while returns flatten. Small adjustments absorb pressure rather than trigger reactions. Staffing levels hold, but hours redistribute. Resources flow toward reliability instead of expansion. These changes occur quietly, guided by necessity rather than announcement. Operational survival prioritizes predictability over ambition as conditions tighten. Sellers refine processes, emphasizing continuity and cost control. These adjustments reflect discipline, not retreat, creating sustainable rhythm through service reliance and conservative exposure management under constrained demand cycles over extended periods. The retail environment adapts through repetition. Each adjustment reinforces the next. Ordering conservatively protects cash flow. Service anchors consistency. Tighter margins demand precision. None of these steps reverse direction. They establish a new operating baseline built around survival rather than growth. From this recalibrated position, attention naturally drifts toward how ownership behavior begins to mirror the same restraint emerging on the sales floor. Ownership decisions shift. Behavior changes without complaint. Accessories remain optional longer. Custom editions wait for justification rather than impulse. The initial purchase no longer triggers immediate upgrades. Decisions stretch across seasons instead of weeks. Ownership becomes deliberate. Replacement cycles extend. Machines remain in use past earlier thresholds. Maintenance replaces replacement. Repairs are weighed carefully. The decision to move on becomes conditional rather than assumed. Hold times lengthen as value extraction increases. Usage adapts accordingly. Trips are planned with greater intention. Wear is monitored. Upkeep becomes proactive rather than reactive. The relationship shifts towards stewardship instead of consumption. Each choice reflects calculation rather than attachment. Ownership economics surface through restraint rather than dissatisfaction. These behaviors signal recalibration, where stewardship replaces turnover and planning replaces impulse in everyday decision-making under tighter financial and temporal constraints. These behaviors signal pressure without protest. No dissatisfaction is voiced, no criticism is required. Action speaks through restraint. When additions slow and replacements delay, the message registers clearly. Ownership patterns settle into longevity rather than turnover. This shift carries forward into how connection to the brand itself quietly evolves beyond transactional decisions. If this report helped you understand the risks built into everyday highways, consider subscribing to stay informed. Future videos will continue examining overlooked safety decisions that affect riders directly. Staying subscribed ensures you see these investigations as they develop, without noise, spin, or watered. Trust reorients. Caution becomes mutual. Sellers and owners approach decisions with the same reserve. Conversations focus on durability, timing, and exposure. Optimism yields to evaluation. Restraint aligns expectations. Recognition of risk spreads evenly. Commitments are paced. Assumptions are questioned. Confidence depends on verification rather than reputation. Shared understanding replaces persuasion. Alignment forms quietly. No demands are issued, no blame circulates. Each side acknowledges uncertainty without naming it directly. Actions synchronize through observation rather than instruction. Alignment forms when uncertainty is shared, and expectations adjust accordingly. Mutual restraint stabilizes interaction, enabling cooperation without persuasion. Trust migrates toward consistency and verification, sustaining balance through awareness rather than reliance on promise during prolonged evaluation and adaptive decision cycles. Trust does not disappear. It changes direction. It attaches to consistency instead of promise. It values transparency over projection. This reorientation stabilizes interactions, defining a cautious equilibrium that reflects collective awareness. The consequences settle into place, completing the shift from confidence to careful coordination. Capital forces a decision. Financial pressure rarely announces itself with urgency. It accumulates through expectations that go unmet and timelines that extend without resolution. Shareholders begin to ask for clarity instead of patience. Involvement increases through structured engagement rather than public demands. Capital seeks direction once momentum fades. Strategic conversations narrow. Objectives are prioritized. Initiatives are evaluated against return rather than ambition. Expansion yields to consolidation. Investment flows towards certainty instead of possibility. These shifts appear in planning documents, capital allocation, and governance discussions. Limits of patience become visible through action. Funding approvals slow. Reviews lengthen. Performance thresholds tighten. Decisions once deferred are brought forward. Financial discipline asserts itself as a guiding force rather than a supporting one. Capital asserts influence through conditional support and heightened oversight. Investment seeks clarity, compressing timelines and narrowing tolerance. These forces direct strategy toward measurable return, shaping decisions through accountability, rather than aspiration across governance structures, planning horizons, and resource allocation processes. This pressure does not seek conflict. It seeks outcome. Capital responds to trajectory, not sentiment. When returns soften and visibility narrows, direction must be set. That requirement defines the environment moving forward. From that point, attention turns away from immediate correction and toward the broader question of how identity interacts with function under sustained scrutiny. The market observes as resources align around durability rather than promise, establishing a boundary for what can continue unchanged and what must adapt to persist. Heritage is no longer a shield. Tradition carries value, but it does not override performance. Memory informs expectation, yet function determines viability. The distinction sharpens as scrutiny increases. What once protected perception now competes with measurable delivery. Stories persist, but they operate alongside evaluation. Reputation remains present without guaranteeing preference. The balance between narrative and outcome becomes central. Heritage offers context, not insulation. Function asserts its role through consistency. Performance defines repeatability. Delivery confirms credibility. When alignment weakens, history cannot compensate indefinitely. The market distinguishes between remembrance and relevance without commentary. This framing introduces a dilemma rather than a verdict. Tradition and function coexist until one no longer supports the other. Memory and performance diverge when results do not reinforce expectation. Story and delivery must align to maintain influence. Legacy provides context, but cannot replace performance under scrutiny. Evaluation distinguishes narrative value from functional delivery. This separation clarifies expectations, requiring alignment between promise and output. To sustain credibility over time as conditions evolve, comparisons intensify, and standards recalibrate. Continually, resolution emerges through recognition, not judgment. Heritage retains meaning, yet it cannot substitute for alignment. The environment clarifies that protection once granted by legacy now depends on execution. With that understanding established, attention widens to observe how competitors and alternatives respond to the same conditions. The broader field begins adjusting around this recalibrated standard, redistributing emphasis and redefining centers of gravity across the industry. The industry rebalances. Markets adapt without ceremony. Space opens where certainty recedes. Alternatives gain visibility as attention redistributes. The center shifts incrementally rather than abruptly. Loyalty fragments as evaluation replaces habit. Choice expands. Decision paths lengthen. Influence spreads across multiple offerings instead of concentrating around a single anchor. The environment becomes comparative by default. Supply aligns with this movement. Distribution adjusts. Innovation targets gaps created by hesitation elsewhere. The field responds collectively, not competitively. Balance replaces dominance. This rebalancing does not elevate one position over another. It reflects adjustment to changed conditions. Stability returns through dispersion rather than concentration. The system absorbs change by widening its structure. Rebalancing distributes influence across multiple participants as concentration fades. choice expands, loyalty diffuses, and innovation targets emerging gaps. This adaptive response restores stability through diversity rather than dominance within supply chains, retail channels, product categories, and evolving consumer decision environments. As equilibrium forms, the market settles into a new configuration. No single entity defines direction alone. Influence becomes shared. This shift completes the external response, leaving one final interpretation to be drawn. The outcome reflects systemic correction rather than targeted consequence, setting the stage for a measured conclusion grounded in observation rather than reaction. The outcome is not punishment. The result is neither backlash nor reward. It is correction. Markets respond to information and behavior over time. Feedback accumulates, adjustment follows. No celebration accompanies this process. No condemnation is issued. The mechanism operates through choice, allocation, and comparison. Influence rises or falls based on alignment with expectation. Correction restores balance. It redirects momentum toward consistency. It favors delivery over declaration. The process remains impartial. Outcomes reflect participation rather than intent. Correction reflects systemic response to accumulated feedback rather than targeted consequence. Markets recalibrate through selection and allocation, reinforcing alignment. The outcome stabilizes conditions without celebration, sustaining equilibrium through ongoing responsiveness as participation adjusts, expectations normalize, and comparative mechanisms remain active. This resolution closes the sequence without finality. Change continues as conditions evolve. The market holds its position, attentive and adaptive. Response replaces reaction. Stability returns through alignment. Roads should forgive mistakes, not punish riders for them. What you saw here is about standards and quiet decisions that keep repeating. If this helped you see the roadside differently, hit like and subscribe for more rider-focused breakdowns. And share your experience in the comments. What barriers are on your routes? And what have you noticed over the years? Your stories help keep this honest.